The night they threw Miss Verity Lark out of Crail Priory, the sea came up the cliffs of Carrick like a living thing that meant to have somebody, and I have doctored on that coast for 40 winters, and never seen a man carry a soul through my door the way the Duke of Wraymont carried her through mine, soaked to the bone, his own lips blue, his arms locked around a woman so still I took her for dead before I took her for anything at all. I am Elias Marsh. I set bones and close wounds and sit with the dying in a gray stone county where the land ends in a drop and the water below it has no mercy in it whatsoever. I have known Damon Ashcroft since we were boys throwing stones off those same cliffs, long before he was a duke and long before the coast folk crossed themselves when his name was spoken. So when I tell you what happened that winter, the winter of the wreck and the ruby and the lie, you may believe I tell it plainly, because I was there for the half of it I saw, and Verity and Damon between them told me the rest, and neither of them was ever in the habit of decorating the truth. Let me begin where it began for her, though I only learned it after, sitting by her bed with her cold hand in mine, coaxing the story out of her a sentence at a time as the fever broke. She had been governess at Crail Priory for 3 years, teaching the 2 Crail children their letters and their sums and their manners, and by every account she had done it well. The priory sat 2 miles up the coast from Wraymont, a handsome, cold house belonging to Sir Marcus Crail and his lady, Sidonie, and it is Lady Sidonie you must fix your mind upon, for she is the whole reason a good young woman nearly died in the sea that night. Lady Sidonie Crail was one of those women whose beauty had curdled into vanity so long ago that nothing sweet was left in it. She required to be the loveliest object in any room, the most admired, the most necessary. And Verity Lark, plain-gowned, quiet, no fortune, no family to speak of, had committed the unforgivable sin of being liked. The children adored her, the servants confided in her. Even Sir Marcus, a dull and harmless man, had once said at his own dinner table that the governess had more sense than half the county, and had never noticed how his wife's mouth went thin as he said it. Verity noticed. Verity noticed everything. It was the making and the near unmaking of her. She had learned young to read a room the way I read a wound, quickly, and without being seen to do it, because a girl with no protector in the world learns early that her only shield is knowing which way the wind sits before it turns. She had been the daughter of a country parson, raised on scripture and mended linen, orphaned at 17 and turned out to earn her bread among strangers. She had done it with a straight back and a truthful tongue, and not one soul in the world to catch her if she fell. So she saw the thing coming. She simply could not stop it. It came on the last evening in November, with the barometer dropping and the gulls going inland and every fisherman in the village dragging his boat high up the shingle, because the sky over the water had gone the particular bruised color that means the coast is about to be beaten half to death. Lady Sidonie chose that evening, of all evenings, to lose a brooch. It was a ruby brooch, old, valuable, a gift from Sir Marcus's mother, and it went missing from her ladyship's dressing table between the dressing hour and dinner. There was a search. There was a great deal of noise. And then Lady Sidonie's own maid, a sharp-faced creature named Dorcas, who had never liked the governess for reasons Verity had likewise noticed and could not prevent, came down the stairs holding the brooch in her fingertips as though it were something dead. She had found it, she said, in Miss Lark's workbox, wrapped in Miss Lark's own handkerchief. I have thought about that moment a great deal since. I have thought about what it is to be standing in a cold hall with the wind starting to scream in the chimneys, and to watch a jewel you have never touched produced from among your own poor belongings, and to understand all at once, entire, like ice water going down your collar, that you are lost, that there is no argument you can make, that the truth is a small thing, and the lie is a large one, and the large one has all the money and all the standing and all the will in the world behind it. Verity did not weep. She told me that later, and I believed her, because in all the weeks she lay under my care I never once saw her weep for herself. She wept for other people readily enough, but never for Verity Lark. She stood in that hall with the ruby glinting in the maid's hand, and Lady Sidney's face lit up with a triumph she was at no pains to hide. And she said, quite steadily, that she had never seen the brooch before in her life, and that whoever had put it in her workbox had done so to ruin her. "How dare you?" said Lady Sidney very softly, and it was the softness that Verity said frightened her, because a shout blows itself out and a whisper does not. "How dare you stand in my house and add slander to theft?" Sir Marcus, poor foolish man, wanted to send for the magistrate in the morning and have the matter looked into properly, and their Lady Sidney made the calculation that nearly killed a woman, because she did not want the matter looked into properly. A magistrate might ask questions. A magistrate might wonder why a governess of 3 unblemished years should suddenly turn thief, and might notice, as any thinking person would, that the only creature in that house who profited from Verity Lark's disgrace was the mistress who could not bear to be less loved than her own children's teacher. Lady Sidney did not want justice. She wanted the woman gone tonight, gone in disgrace, gone before anyone with sense could look at the thing squarely. So she told her husband that she would not sleep another night under the same roof as a thief, that the governess's presence was an insult to her, that the woman must go at once, and that if Marcus loved her at all, he would not stand there arguing while his wife was made a fool of in her own house. And Sir Marcus, who loved peace more than he loved fairness, gave way. He always gave way. It is a particular kind of cowardice, that the cowardice of the comfortable man who will let any cruelty happen so long as it happens quietly, and he is not asked to raise his voice. They gave Verity 10 minutes to gather what she could carry. They did not give her wages owed. They did not give her a character, that letter of good conduct without which no respectable house would ever take her, for how could a thief be given a character? They gave her a small carpet bag with a change of linen and her mother's Bible, and the few coins she had saved, and they put her out the servants' door into the dark, into the wind, into the first cold spitting of the rain, with 2 miles of open cliff road between her and the village, and the storm coming up out of the west like the end of the world. The children cried. That, she told me, was the one thing that broke her composure. Little amiable Creole, 6 years old, sobbing at an upstairs window, and Verity not permitted even to say goodbye. She looked up at that small streaming face and lifted her hand to it, and then the door was shut behind her, and she was alone on the step with the whole black night in front of her. That was the state of things when the storm took her. A truthful woman, cast out for a theft she never committed, walking a cliff road in the dark with the sea rising, because a vain woman could not bear to be less beloved than her governess. Now I must tell you about the man who found her, for the coast would have you believe he was a monster, and the coast was wrong. Damon Ashcroft, Duke of Wraymont, was 36 that winter and had been called the Storm Duke for the better part of a decade. They called him that because the wrecks happened on his shore. Wraymont Court stands high on the western headland, and below it the sea has thrown up a reef of black rock that has been drowning ships since before there were dukes at all, a place the charts mark and the fog erases, where a vessel driven in by a westerly gale has perhaps 1 chance in 5 of coming off whole. In a hard winter 3 or 4 ships would strike there, and the bodies and the cargo would come up on Wraymont's beach, and because a man is always easier to blame than the sea, the county had woven itself a comfortable story in which the Duke was somehow the author of it all. They said he lit false lights to lure ships onto the rocks and plunder them. They said the Wraymont cellars were full of stolen cargo. They said he had grown rich on drowned men. None of it was true. I knew his accounts as I knew his childhood, and he had never taken so much as a barrel of salt fish off that beach that he did not send straight to the poor of the parish. But truth is a slow horse and rumor is a fast one, and by that winter the Storm Duke was a figure the fishermen frightened their children with. There was a reason he let them think it. There is always a reason with Damon buried deep where he thinks no one can reach it. I could reach it, because I had been at his side the night it was made, and the night it was made was the night his brother died. Frederick Ashcroft was 4 years the younger, the sunniest boy God ever put on that grim coast, and he drowned at 19 off Wraymont Reef trying to reach a wreck. A brig had struck in a February gale, and the crew were clinging to the rigging screaming for help that the village would not give, because the village believed, even then, that Wraymont's shore was cursed, and that a man who went out to it went out to his death. So the boys went out themselves. Damon and Frederick took a boat into that surf with 2 grooms and a coil of rope, because Damon could not stand on his own beach and listen to men die, and they got 4 sailors off before the sea took the boat over and took Frederick with it. Damon reached the shore. Frederick did not. Damon held his brother's body on the shingle at first light with the whole silent village standing back from him, as though grief were a thing they might catch, and something in him closed like a door and did not open again for 10 years. That is the man they called a monster. A man who had gone into the sea for strangers and lost his brother to it, and had gone out again every hard night since, alone now, working the reef with a rope and a lantern and no help from anyone, saving whom he could and losing whom he could not, and never once telling the county the truth of what he did, because the county had stood back and watched Frederick drown, and Damon Ashcroft had decided in his grief and his pride that he owed them no explanations at all. Let them think what they liked. Let them call him the Storm Duke. He would go down to his terrible beach when the westerlies blew, and he would pull the living from the water, and if they wanted to believe he was the one who put them there, that was their sin to carry and not his to correct. He was down on that beach the night Verity Lark was cast out. Of course he was. The glass had been falling all day. He had known since noon that the reef would want him before morning. He was standing at the tide line in his oilskins with his lantern hooded and his rope coiled over his shoulder, watching the water come up gray and monstrous in the last of the light, waiting for the crash that would tell him a ship had struck. And instead, above him and to the north, along the top of the cliff where the coast road ran, he saw a small dark figure struggling against the wind where no sane person had any business being. He told me afterward that he thought at first it was a fisherman's wife gone up to watch for a boat, and that he nearly turned back to his waiting. And then the figure staggered and the wind took it, and he understood 2 things at once, that it was a woman, and that the section of cliff she had been driven toward was the section that had been undercutting itself all autumn, a shelf of turf hanging over nothing, with the tide already boiling in the cove below it. He did not remember climbing the cliff path. He told me he never did remember it, that there was the beach, and then there was the top of the cliff and the wind trying to peel him off it, and the woman perhaps 30 feet away, on her knees now, clinging to a gorse root with the ground crumbling out from under her and the black water 40 feet straight down. She was calling out. He could not hear the words over the storm. He roared at her to hold, that he was coming, and he went down onto his own knees and crawled out along that failing shelf of turf with the rope in his teeth, and he had almost reached her. His hand was almost on her wrist, when the whole edge of the cliff gave way beneath them both and dropped them into the sea. Here is a thing I have learned in 40 years of doctoring, and it is the only sermon I will preach in this account. The world is not arranged so that the good are caught before they fall. Verity Lark was good, and she fell anyway, and so did the man who tried to save her, straight down into a February sea that kills a strong swimmer in minutes. If the story ended there, it would only be one more cruelty on a cruel coast, and God knows the coast had enough of those. But Damon Ashcroft had been going into that water for 10 years, and he knew it the way I know a heartbeat, and even falling he kept his wits and his grip on the rope, and the far end of that rope was made fast to an iron ring set in the rock at the head of the path. He had driven it there himself, years before, for exactly such a night as this. So when the sea closed over them, it did not take them out. The rope held, and swung them hard against the base of the cliff, and Damon got an arm around Verity in the dark, and the cold and the roaring, and would not let the water have her. I will not pretend I understand how a man climbs a wet rope out of a winter sea, with an unconscious woman held against his chest. I only know that he did it because I saw them both an hour later, and the rope had flayed his hands to the bone and he had never once let go. He got her up onto the path. He got her over his shoulder. He carried her the half-mile back to Wraymont Court against a wind that knocked him to his knees 3 times, and he did not stop. And when the great door was hauled open and the light fell on him, he stood swaying in his own hall with a drowned woman in his arms and said, in a voice his servants had not heard from him in a decade, "Send for Marsh. Now. Ride." They rode, I came. And that is how, near midnight, with the storm screaming round Wraymont Court, I found myself kneeling on the floor of the great hall over a young woman I had never seen in my life, working to bring the breath back into her, while the storm duke stood over us both with his ruined hands hanging at his sides, and his eyes fixed on her face, as though the whole world had narrowed to the question of whether she would breathe again or not. She breathed. It was a near thing. I will not pretend otherwise, and I have never lied to a patient or to God about how near a thing it was, but she breathed, and coughed up half the Atlantic, and I got her warm and I got her dry, and I got her into a bed in the finest chamber of that house, because the Duke would hear of nothing else. And somewhere near 3 in the morning her fever came up like the tide itself, and settled in for a long stay. "Who is she?" I asked him, when I had done what could be done and there was nothing left but to wait. We were in his study. I was binding his hands, which he had refused to let me touch until his eyes had told him she would live. He had not sat down. I do not think it had occurred to him to sit down. "I don't know," he said. "You went off a cliff into the sea for a woman you don't know." He looked at me then, Damon Ashcroft, whom the whole county believed had ice where his heart should be, and he said a thing I have never forgotten. "She was drowning, Elias. What is there to know beyond that?" I finished his hands in silence. There are men who will tell you at great length how good they are, and there are very few men who are good and do not seem to know it. And it has been my experience that the second kind are worth more than the whole shouting remainder of the human race. I had known which kind Damon was since we were 9 years old. It had merely taken the county rather longer, and it would take a cast-out governess with a fever and a truthful tongue to make them see it at last. She was 3 days in the fever. I will not weary you with the medicine of it. It is enough to say that I did not leave Wraymont Court in those 3 days, and that neither did the Duke. He would not go to his own bed. He sat outside her door, or stood at the window of her chamber with his back to the room, and when the fever had her raving, he was the one who held the cool cloth to her brow, though I offered a dozen times to send his housekeeper to it. Mrs. Trewin, that housekeeper, a stout, warm-hearted Carrick woman who had known him from a boy, told me privately in the passage that she had not seen her master's face turned toward another living creature with that look in it since Master Frederick died. "'Tis as if she's woke summat up in him, doctor," she said, twisting her apron. "And him not even knowing her name." On the 3rd night the fever broke. I was dozing in the chair, the Duke was at the window, and into the sudden quiet came a voice from the bed, thin and clear and entirely sane. "I did not take the brooch," it said. We both came to our feet. She was looking at the ceiling, her eyes open and lucid, her hands folded on the counterpane as neatly as a child saying its prayers. "I did not take it," she said again. "Whoever tells you I did is lying, and I would rather you knew that than anything else about me." And then she turned her head and saw the 2 of us standing there, a rumpled old doctor and a great dark Duke, and I watched her take stock of the strange rich room and the fire and the silk hangings and understand slowly that she was not dead and not in prison and not anywhere she had ever been before. "Where am I?" she asked. "And who are you that you should care whether I am a thief?" Damon Ashcroft crossed the room and stood at the foot of her bed. In the firelight, with his bandaged hands and his shadowed face, he must have looked to her exactly like the monster the county swore he was. "You are at Wraymont Court," he said. "I am its master. And I do not care in the least whether you are a thief, because a thief has as much right not to drown as a bishop, and I would have gone in after either." He paused, and something in his voice gentled without his seeming to permit it. "But since you have told me you are innocent, and since I find I believe you, we may take it as settled between us and speak of it no more. What is your name?" "Verity," she said, "Verity Lark." "Verity," he repeated, as though testing the weight of it, and I saw the corner of his hard mouth move, the barest thing gone as soon as it came. "A truthful name. It suits you better than the county's opinion of my house suits me. Rest, Miss Lark. You are safe here, whatever you have heard of the man who says so." And he went out and left me to my patient, and I sat back down in my chair thinking that in 40 years I had never once heard Damon Ashcroft make a jest, and that the world was clearly ending. She mended slowly. The sea takes a toll that lingers, and her lungs were a long time clearing, and I would not hear of her stirring from that bed until I was satisfied. A tyranny she bore with more grace than most dukes I have physicked. In those days of her mending I came to know her, and I will tell you plainly, so that you understand everything that followed, that I came to love her as I would a daughter, and that I am not an easy man to make love anyone. She was not beautiful in the way Lady Sidney Crail was beautiful, all polished surface and cold fire. She was better than beautiful. She was true all the way through, the way a good bell is true, so that everything she said rang clean. She had a mind like a well-kept ledger, and a heart she kept carefully banked, because a woman alone in the world cannot afford to let a heart run loose, and she had a way of looking at you when you spoke that made you feel, perhaps for the first time in years, that you had actually been heard. She read whatever books I brought her from the court's library, and the Wraymont library was a great one, for the Ashcrofts had been a bookish line under all their brooding, and she argued with me about them cheerfully, and she never once, in all those weeks, asked me for pity or spoke a bitter word about the people who had thrown her to the sea. That last was what undid the Duke, I think, though he would sooner have gone off the cliff again than admit it. He was a man who had been eaten alive by his own bitterness for 10 years, bitterness at the county, at the men who let his brother drown, at a God who arranged the world so badly, and here was a girl who had been used more cruelly than he ever had, cast out to die for nothing, and there was not one drop of bitterness in her anywhere. It confounded him. It drew him the way warmth draws a man in from the cold before he even knows he is cold. He came to her chamber every day. At first he made excuses of it. He had come to see how his physician did. He had come to ask after her fever. The housekeeper had wished him to carry up this book or that broth, and I let him have his excuses, because it is not a doctor's place to notice such things aloud. But by the second week the excuses had worn through, and he simply came and sat by the fire and talked with her. I was often there, and I watched it happen, and it was like watching a spring come slowly back into a dead garden. He told her things he had never told me, and I had known him 30 years. He told her about Frederick. I heard him do it, one gray afternoon with the rain ticking on the glass, in a voice so low and level you would not have known he was tearing his own heart open to do it. He told her about the wreck and the rope and the 4 men saved and the 1 brother lost, and about the village standing back on the beach, and about the 10 years of letting them think the worst of him because he could not forgive them and would not explain himself. He told her all of it, this man who told no one anything, and Verity Lark sat very still and listened with her whole self, and when he had finished, she did not offer him comfort, because she was too honest for cheap comfort. She said only this: "You have let them make you into their monster so that you would not have to forgive them. That is a great deal of trouble to go to, Your Grace, to keep from doing the one thing that might set you free. I have physicked the human body my whole life, and I have never in that time seen a wound closed as cleanly as she closed one in him with that single sentence." He stared at her. Then he laughed, a short, astonished, rusty sound, a man laughing who has forgotten how, and he said, "You are a very impertinent guest, Miss Lark." "I'm a very truthful one," she said. You told me yourself the name suited me." "So I did." He rose to go, and at the door he turned back and his voice had changed again. "No one has spoken plainly to me in 10 years, he said. "They are all too frightened. I find I had forgotten how much I missed it." And he went out, and Verity looked at the fire for a long time after, and I pretended to read my book and saw nothing at all, which is a physician's chief professional skill. It could not stay a secret from the coast, of course. Nothing does. The Duke of Wraymont had a young woman convalescing under his roof, and within a fortnight the county had heard of it and gone to work with its imagination, and the story it told was not a kind one. What business had the Storm Duke with a young woman in his house? The same wicked business, the county decided, that a wicked man always has. That she had been carried and half drowned off his own cursed beach only deepened the tale, for had he not always grown rich on what the sea brought him, and was this not merely a new and more shameful cargo? I heard it in the village and in the market town, and, God forgive them, in the very church porch, and it made me want to take a stick to the lot of them. And into that poisoned county air came Lady Sydney Crale's own version of events, which she was at great and public pains to spread, for she had learned, to her fury, that the thieving governess she had thrown out to die had not in fact died, but was lodged in a duke's finest chamber being nursed like a princess. This she could not abide. It was intolerable to her that the woman she had ruined should land soft. So Lady Sydney told anyone who would listen that Miss Verity Lark was a proven thief who had robbed her own kind mistress and been justly dismissed, and that whatever the creature was doing in the Storm Duke's house was no more than such a creature deserved and no better than she ought to be. And she said it with a great show of Christian sorrow that made me, when it was reported to me, use language in front of Mrs. Trewin that I afterward apologized for. Here is the difficulty, and Verity saw it before any of us. She was mending. Soon she would be well. And when she was well she must leave Wraymont Court, because a young woman cannot live under a bachelor duke's roof, and there was not a house in the county that would now take a governess with the double disgrace of theft and scandal hanging on her, and no character, and no family, and nowhere on God's earth to go. She had been saved from the sea only to be handed back, whole and healed, to a world that had already decided to destroy her more slowly. She said as much to me quietly one evening when the Duke was not there. "You have been very kind, Doctor," she said, "and so has he, kinder than I have any claim on. But I am not a fool, and I know what waits for me at the bottom of this. I would rather face it clear-eyed than be coddled into forgetting it. When you judge me well enough to travel, I will go, and you must not any of you follow me with your kindness, because it cannot help me where I am going, and it will only cost you the county's goodwill you have to spare." "And where is it you think you're going?" I asked her. She did not answer that. She looked at the fire, and her hands were very still in her lap, and I understood that a woman with no character and no money and no home does not have a great many roads open to her, and that the ones that are open are not roads a decent woman walks by choice, and I felt the whole cold weight of the world's injustice settle on my old shoulders. I resolved that night that I would not let it happen. I did not yet know how I would prevent it. I only knew that I would. I need not have troubled myself. There was a man in that house who had already decided the same thing, and he had a great deal more power to enforce it than an old country doctor. The Duke found me in the library the next morning. He had not slept, I could see it, and he came to the point with the directness that was the truest thing about him. "She means to leave," he said. "She does. She has nowhere to go, and she knows it, and she will not sit here and let it cost you your standing in the county. She has more honor than the whole county put together, which is a low bar, but she clears it by a mile. They are saying things about her." His voice was very quiet. "In the village, in the town, vile things because she is here. They are. And things about me. That I have that she is." He could not finish it. He turned away to the window, to the gray sea he had spent his whole life fighting, and I saw his bandaged hands close into fists behind his back. "I have not touched her, Elias. I have not so much as taken her hand. I would sooner cut off my arm than give the county one true word to say against her." "I know that," I said. "So does she. It changes nothing. The world does not require a thing to be true before it will believe it." He was silent a long while. Then he said, still to the window, "There is one thing that would stop their mouths. One thing that would make her untouchable. Give her a character no house on earth could question. Put her beyond every lie the Creole woman can tell, and answer every filthy word the county is saying about the two of us all at once." I knew what he meant. I confess my old heart leapt to hear him mean it. But I am a physician, and it is my trade to be honest even when honesty is unwelcome, and so I said, "You cannot marry a woman to rescue her, Damon. You can save her from the sea like that in a moment with your body, but you cannot marry her out of pity and expect either of you to survive it. She would know. She reads a room the way I read a pulse. She would know she had been rescued a second time, and it would break something in her that the sea never touched. She would rather go down to the town and starve with her honor than be a duke's charity. If that is all you have to offer her nothing, and let me find her a decent place in some far county where the lies have not reached." He turned from the window then, and his face was the face of a man who has just discovered the ground beneath him is not the ground he thought. "Pity," he said slowly. "You think it is pity. Is it not?" And Damon Ashcroft, the Storm Duke, the terror of the coast, the man with ice where his heart should be, looked at me with something close to helplessness and said, "Elias, I went off a cliff into a February sea for a stranger and thought nothing of it. I have gone into that water 100 times for strangers. It has never once frightened me. And I am more frightened this morning of that woman in that room and what she has done to me than I have ever been of the sea in my life. It is not pity. God help me, I wish it were. Pity I would know how to manage." I sat down rather heavily. "Then," I said, "you had better tell her so, because she is packing her bag as we speak, and she will be gone by Thursday, and she is exactly proud enough to walk out of this house forever rather than let you sacrifice yourself for her, and she will never, ever guess it is not a sacrifice unless you find the words to tell her. And you, my old friend, have not spoken a true word about your own heart to another living soul since we were 19 years old, so I suggest you begin practicing." He did not answer. He went out. And I sat in the library and prayed, in my rusty fashion, that a man who had spent a decade forgetting how to say what he felt might remember in time. He did not get the chance to say it that day, nor the next, because on the third day the Creoles came to Wraymont Court, and everything came to its head at once. I was there when they came, by good fortune or God's design. I had ridden over to see my patient and had stayed to argue with her about a book, and so I was in the great hall when Mrs. Trewin came to say, white about the mouth, that Sir Marcus and Lady Sidney Creole were at the door and demanding to see the Duke on a matter of law. They had come, it transpired, in force. Sir Marcus, hangdog and reluctant, plainly there against his own inclination. Lady Sidney, magnificent in furs, her beautiful face composed into a mask of wounded virtue. And with them, this was the stroke that told me how frightened Lady Sidney truly was beneath her furs. A constable from the market town, a heavy, stupid official man with a paper in his hand, because her ladyship had decided that the surest way to end the intolerable spectacle of her ruined Governess landing soft was to have the woman arrested for the theft of the ruby brooch and taken away to answer for it, and disgrace anyone who tried to shield her. I will set down what happened in that hall as it happened, because I have gone over it many times and I would not have you think I improve it. The Duke came down. He had Verity brought down too, at Lady Sidney's insistence, and I think at his own, for he wanted her there, wanted her to see it, whatever it cost. She came into the hall pale and steady, wrapped in a shawl of Mrs. Trewin's, and she stood very straight beside the great cold hearth and did not lean on anything, though I could see the standing cost her. Lady Sidney looked at her the way a cat looks at a bird, and Verity looked back with those clear gray eyes and did not flinch, and I thought, whatever else happens here, they will not make her flinch, and I loved her for it. Lady Sidney made her case first. She made it beautifully, I will grant her that. She spoke of her Christian duty, of the pain it caused her tender heart to pursue a fallen woman, of the sacred ruby that was all she had of her dear departed mother-in-law, of the shock of discovering the theft, of the mercy she had shown in merely dismissing the creature when she might have prosecuted her on the spot. She spoke of her distress at learning the thief had imposed herself upon the Duke's noble generosity, and of her fear. Here she pressed a scented handkerchief to her dry eyes, that his Grace's kind heart was being cruelly abused by a practiced deceiver. And she concluded by saying, with a little sorrowful shake of her lovely head, that the law must now take its course, that the constable would remove Miss Lark to answer for her crime, and that she prayed God would have mercy on the wretched woman's soul. It was a masterpiece. Sir Marcus stared at the floor throughout it. The constable shifted from foot to foot, and Verity Lark stood by the cold hearth and heard herself sent to prison in that soft musical voice, and said nothing, because there was nothing she could say that a duke and a knight and a constable would weigh against a lady's tears. Then Damon Ashcroft spoke, and I have thought ever since that the county lost its monster forever in the space of the next 5 minutes, because there is no unhearing what a man says when he finally speaks after 10 years of silence. "You are very thorough, madam," he said. "You have thought of everything, a constable, a warrant, a witness, a grieving heart. You have built a very handsome scaffold. There is only one plank missing from it, and I am afraid it is the plank the whole thing must stand on." He came down the last of the stairs unhurried, and every eye in the hall went to him. "You have not once explained why Miss Lark should have done it." Lady Sidney's beautiful face did not change, but something behind it did. "Why? Because she is a thief, your Grace. Thieves steal. That is the beginning and the end of it." "Is it?" The Duke's voice was terribly gentle. "She was 3 years in your house. 3 years with the run of it, your children's rooms, your linen, your plate, your very jewel case, I should imagine, on the nights she dressed the children for a party. 3 years, madam, and never a spoon missing. And then, on the one evening a great storm was coming, with the road washing out and the tide rising, she suddenly turns thief, and takes not money, not something she might sell and slip away with, but a single famous brooch that any pawnbroker in England would know at a glance, and that could serve her no earthly purpose but to hang her. She steals the one thing in your house it would be madness to steal. On the one night it was madness to be abroad, and then she puts it where? In her own workbox, wrapped in her own handkerchief, in the most obvious hiding place a guilty child could invent, and waits patiently to be found out." He let the silence stretch. "I have known a great many wicked people in my life, madam. I have never known a stupid theft dressed so carefully to look exactly like a clumsy one. It is the sort of theft a person commits who has never stolen anything, because they have had to imagine how a thief would behave, and they have imagined it badly." The constable had stopped shifting his feet. He was listening now, the way a slow man listens when something at last makes sense to him. "Someone put that brooch in her box," the Duke went on. "Someone in your house, madam, who wished her gone and wished it badly enough to send her to the sea for it. Now, shall we send for the person who found it, your maid, I think, this Dorcas, and ask her, before the constable and before God, to explain exactly how she came to look in a governess's workbox at all? For it is a strange thing to do, is it not, when a jewel goes missing from your mistress's own table, to go straight past every likelier place and put your hand directly into the one box in the house where the guilt would ruin the one woman your mistress could not abide? And there it was. There was the thing, laid bare in the middle of that great hall, the whole ugly machinery of it, the jealous mistress and the sharp-faced maid and the planted jewel, and Lady Sidney Crail, for the first time since I had known of her, could not find a word to say. She had come armed with everything but the one thing she needed, which was a reason, and the Storm Duke had walked all round her scaffold in the dark and pulled out the single plank, and now she stood on nothing at all. It was Sir Marcus who broke. He had been staring at the floor through the whole of it, and now he lifted his head and his dull face was gray, and he said, in the voice of a man waking from a long, comfortable dream into something dreadful, "Sidonie, look at me. Did you—" He could not finish it. He tried again. "The child asked for her, amiable, every night since, asks where Miss Lark has gone, cries for her. I have told the child her governess was wicked, and the child will not believe me because the child knew her, and his voice cracked. I did not know her at all, did I? I let you put her out into a storm, and I never once asked if it was true." "Marcus," said Lady Sidonie, and her voice had lost its music entirely. But he was not looking at her any longer. He turned to the Duke and to Verity by the hearth, and this dull, weak, comfortable man who had let every cruelty happen so long as it happened quietly, he did the one brave thing of his life. "It was Dorcas found it," he said, "my wife's own woman. And my wife told me the matter was not to go before a magistrate, that it must be done that night quietly, the girl gone before morning. I thought it strange. I let it be strange. God forgive me, I let it be strange because it was easier." He drew a shaking breath. "There will be no charge, Your Grace. There will be no constable. My wife has made a mistake, and I have made a worse one, and I will not compound it by letting this good young woman answer for a crime that was done to her and not by her." He turned at last fully to Verity, and his eyes were wet. "Miss Lark, there are no words. I will not insult you by looking for them. Only the wages you were owed, and a character in my own hand saying you served my children faithfully and honestly for 3 years, and were dismissed by a wrong I did not prevent. Those you will have before I sleep tonight, and my apology, which is worth nothing, but which is yours." The constable put his paper away. Lady Sidonie stood alone in her furs in the middle of the cold hall, and no one looked at her, and that, for a woman who required to be the most looked-at object in any room, was perhaps the truest justice the day could have devised. She had come to make Verity Lark a spectacle, and she left as one herself, and the county, which loves nothing on this earth so much as the fall of the proud, had the whole story by the next market day. She and Sir Marcus went abroad in the spring and did not come back for a long time. I am told the marriage never recovered. I confess I have not lost a great deal of sleep over it. They went. The hall emptied, and when the door had closed on the last of them, there were only the 3 of us left, the Duke, and Verity by the cold hearth, and I standing forgotten by the stairs, and I had wit enough at least to see that I was one person too many. I made some mutter about my horse, and went out to the stables and stood in the good honest smell of hay for a while and left them to it. And what passed between them in that hall I had from Verity herself, long afterward, when she had become the sort of person who told me things. She said that when the others had gone, the Duke came and stood before her at the hearth, and that for a moment neither of them spoke, because the great crisis was over, and the small terrible question was all that was left, and it is always the small questions that are hardest. She said she spoke first. She said she told him she was cleared now and free, and that she had a character in Sir Marcus's own hand and wages owed, and could go into the world again with her head up, and that it was all his doing, and that she did not know how to thank a man for pulling her out of the sea and then out of the fire both, and that she supposed she would spend the rest of her life not knowing how. And she said it, she told me, very quickly and rather too brightly, the way you say a thing you have decided to say before your courage fails, because she had understood, standing there, that the door was open now, that there was nothing left to keep her at Wraymont Court, and that a proud woman with a good character and wages in her pocket had no honest reason to stay under a bachelor duke's roof 1 hour longer than she must, and that if she did not go now at once, while she still could, she never would. And it would cost him everything. And she said Damon Ashcroft listened to all of it, and then he said, "Where will you go?" And she said, "Somewhere far, somewhere the story hasn't reached. I'll find a place. I found one before." And he said, And if I asked you not to? She told me her heart stopped when he said it. She told me she had spent so long armoring herself against hope that hope, when it came, felt very like fear. She said she looked at him and made herself be honest, because it was the only thing she had ever had, her honesty, and she would not surrender it even now. Then I would ask you why, she said. And I would need it to be a true answer, Your Grace, because I have been rescued twice this month, and I find I can bear anything in the world except being rescued a third time. I will not be a kindness. I will not be a thing you saved and then could not think what to do with. I would rather go out into the world with nothing than stay here as a burden on a good man's conscience. So if you ask me to stay out of pity, or duty, or shame at what the county says, ask me anything but that, or say nothing, and let me go while I still can with my heart whole. And Damon Ashcroft, the Storm Duke, who had not spoken a true word about his own heart to another living soul since he was 19 years old, found the words at last. She said he took her hands, both of them in his own scarred ones, very carefully, as though they were something that might break. And he said, I have been going into that sea for 10 years, Verity. 10 years in the dark, alone, because I could not bear to stand on the shore and do nothing while people drowned. And every time before I go in, there is one moment when the water is at my knees and my whole body tells me to turn back, that this is the night the sea finally wins, and every time I go in anyway, because there is someone out there and turning back is a thing I do not know how to do. His voice was not quite steady. I did not turn back for you on the cliff. I have not turned back from you for 1 hour since. You ask me why I want you to stay. It is not pity, I do not pity you. I have never in my life met anyone I pity less. You are the least pitiable soul I have ever known. It is not duty. It is not the county. The county can drown for all of me. He drew a breath. It is that I was a monster for 10 years and did not care, and you looked at me for one afternoon and told me I had gone to a great deal of trouble not to forgive people, and I have not been able to think of anything else since. It is that this house was a tomb until they carried you into it half drowned, and now it is not, and I am terrified. Do you understand me? I who am afraid of nothing, I am terrified of what it will be again when you walk out of that door. I am not asking you to be rescued, Verity. I am asking you to rescue me. I have been drowning a good deal longer than you have, and no one has ever once come out for me, and you are the first, and I do not want to be pulled back into that water when you go. And he said, so low she had to lean in to hear it over the wind, stay, not as a governess and not as a charity and not as anything I saved. Stay as the mistress of this house and of the man who is fool enough to love you. Marry me. I have nothing to offer you but a cursed shore and a bad reputation and a heart that has forgotten how it works. But such as it is entirely yours, and it has been since the moment you told me you did not take the brooch, and would rather I knew that than anything else about you. She told me she wept then, and I have told you she never wept for herself, and she did not even now. She wept, she said, because for the first time in her whole hard, motherless, orphaned, cast-out life, someone had looked at her and wanted her, not for what she could do or what she could bear, but simply and entirely for herself, and she had not known until it happened how starved she had been for it. And she said she took the great, dark, frightening man's scarred hands and lifted them and pressed her wet cheek to them, and she said, "You great fool! You did not have to go into the sea to make me love you. You only had to say you did not care whether I was a thief, because a thief has as much right not to drown as a bishop. I have loved you since that first night when I woke in your house, and you told me I was safe here, whatever I had heard of the man who said so. I only did not tell you because I am a governess with no fortune and no family, and a governess does not say such things to a duke, and I had made up my mind to carry it away with me and never speak of it as long as I lived." She lifted her head and looked at him. "Yes, of course, yes, I will stay. I will marry you. And I will spend the rest of my life telling this wretched county exactly what manner of man you truly are, whether they like to hear it or not. For I am very truthful, Your Grace. You have said so yourself, and it is high time somebody told them the truth about the Storm Duke. I came in from the stables a little while later, because a man cannot stand in a cold barn forever, and I found them by the hearth, and I did not need to be told. The fire had been lit. Someone had lit the great cold hearth at last, and they were standing very close in the light of it, her hands in his, and there was a look on Damon Ashcroft's face that I had last seen there when we were boys, before the sea took his brother and the door closed in him, and I stood in the doorway and felt my old eyes sting and had the sense, for once in my life, to say nothing at all. They were married in the spring, in the little gray church on the headland, in weather so fine and still that not one soul could pretend the coast was cursed. Half the county came, of course, for the county that had whispered against them both could not for its life stay away from a duke's wedding, and I watched them file in with their curiosity and their guilty faces, and I watched them go out again changed, because it is a hard thing to keep hating a man once you have seen his face, while he marries the woman who taught him to forgive you. Verity saw to that in the years that followed. She told the truth about the Storm Duke, exactly as she had promised, told it plainly, over and over at every table and in every cottage, until the county could no longer pretend not to know it. That he went into the sea for strangers, that he had lost his brother doing it, that he had let them think him a monster because his grief was too great to explain, and his pride too great to beg for their good opinion. And a strange thing happened on that coast slowly, over the seasons. The men began to go down to the beach with him when the westerlies blew. First one, then two, then a dozen fishermen who had once frightened their children with his name, standing beside the Storm Duke at the tide line with their own ropes and their own lanterns, so that no man on that shore need ever again go into the water alone. Frederick Ashcroft had died because the village stood back on the beach. Because his brother married a truthful woman, the village stood back no longer. I do not think there is a finer memorial to a drowned boy anywhere in England than that. Little Amable Crail came to live at Wraymont Court within the year, for Sir Marcus, gone abroad with a wife he could no longer love, was glad enough to let his motherless-hearted daughter be raised by the governess she had wept for, and Verity, who had never had a child of her own to keep, kept that one as fierce and tender as any true mother ever kept a daughter. There were Ashcroft children, too, in time, running wild and happy on the headland where their father had grown up in shadow, and the house that had been a tomb was so full of light and noise by then that I could scarcely credit it was the same place where I had once knelt over a drowned woman at midnight and prayed she would breathe. Damon lived a long time, and died an old man in his own bed with his wife's hand in his, a gentler death by far than the sea he had defied for so many years ever meant to give him. And Verity, my Verity, the parson's orphan they threw out to die, was the Duchess of Wraymont for more than 40 years, and there was never in all that county a name spoken with more love, because she had earned every particle of it with truth and kindness, and never once, to her last day, learned how to be anything but honest. I am very old now, and I have set this down because I am the last who remembers how it began, because the young people up at the court know only that their grandfather and grandmother loved each other past the ordinary measure, and do not know that it started on a night of storm with a lie and a ruby and a cliff giving way into the sea. I wanted it written true once by the one man who saw it, before I go where all my patients have gone before me. So here is the truth of it plainly, as she would have wanted, since truth was the only jewel she ever cared to keep. They threw a good woman out into the storm to die for a theft she never committed, and a man the whole world called a monster went into the waves and brought her back, and was saved himself in the doing of it. And of everything I have seen in my long life on that hard and beautiful coast, every wreck and every rescue, every cruelty and every mercy, that is the thing I have chosen to remember, because it is the truest thing I know, and because she taught me, that plain-gowned parson's daughter with the sea in her lungs and no bitterness in her heart, that the truest things are the only ones worth carrying out of this world when we go.